Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a Gameboy game, and that happens to be Penta Dragon. So the game was developed by Japan Art Media, and it was published by Yanoman, and it came out in the year 1992. And yes, at this point it's to be expected, it's Japan only. And it happens to be a top-down action game that has some shoot-'em-up elements. And knowing of this genre, of it being on a Game Boy game, I really don't think I need to say much about the story because it's very minimalistic. But to sum it up quickly, you play as a dragon girl named Sarah, and yes, her parents are both a human and a dragon. So what, did Seto Kaiba fuck the blue eyes white dragon finally? And she wants to fulfill her prophecy by wanting to find her other eye. So are you happy now that you now know the full story of this game, because chances are you probably won't really remember it as you're playing through it. So now let's get talking about the most important thing, the gameplay. So like I said, it's a top-down action game with some shoot-'em-up elements, and it kinda reminds me of the Pocky and Rocky games. So you have to travel through these big mazes shooting at a bunch of enemies, and of course you also gotta pick up some power-ups that all do different things. So not only do you have the typical ones that change the type of shots that you make, but you also do collect items that you put into your inventory. Yes, this game actually has an inventory system. And it's very basic, you can only hold a certain amount of items at a time in each category, whether it be healing, protect, and then special. So you can pick up healing potions, you can also pick up anti-poison or anti-slow, and the protection items are pretty obvious. And as for the special, well, there's many different ones, but probably the most useful one that I found to be would have to be the dragon one, where you fully transform into a dragon and it changes your rate of fire and it's super powerful. You can actually take out those mini bosses no problem. So as you're trying to get through these giant mazes, you will have to fight some mini bosses that will randomly appear, but the good thing is though, you can actually walk all around in the area though, so you're not just stuck in one spot. And I probably don't need to explain it, but at the end of each stage, which there are 7 of them, you have to fight a boss at the end of them. But one weird thing about this game though, is that during some stages though, you can actually find a secret bonus stage, but the bonus stages are not exactly what you would expect for a game like this. So far, this game seems like it's just all medieval fantasy and stuff, but when you get to the bonus stages, you randomly get put into a spaceship, and then turns into a space shooter. But still in the same style though, so yeah, that's pretty damn weird. And you do have a health meter in the game, although of course you can only see it once you pull up your inventory, but the good news is that, very similar to the Valis games, whenever your health is low, the music will change, indicating that you should probably heal yourself up. So thankfully it's not a 1 or 2 shot kill type of game, because that would have made it a real pain in the ass. So now let's get moving on and start talking about the game's controls. And they are very simplistic and do work rather well. So the button layout I don't think I need to go over. I mean, if you know what a Game Boy looks like, it's pretty easy to figure out. But as for the feeling of them, I think they feel pretty good for Game Boy standards. I mean, walking around doesn't feel laggy or anything, and shooting feels pretty good. And shooting in multiple directions is not tedious. It really is that simple. There's not a whole lot else I can say, but if you ever played any other top-down type of game on the Game Boy, such as Spud's Adventure or anything, it feels just like that. It feels good and fine. So now, let's get talking about the game's graphics. And the graphics in this game are decent for Game Boy standards. Obviously, for a 1992 Game Boy game, you kinda have to expect with the limitations. So the backgrounds are okay, and as for these in-game sprites, I think they're decent. I mean, they're cute little miniatures, so it's kinda charming. And as for the opening cutscene, I do think that actually looks pretty cool. In fact, I actually found that the main character in this shot right here kinda looks like the main character from the anime series Dragon Half. So yes, the in-game graphics have a more cutesy style. I guess you could say it's a cute-em-up, I guess. Although the bosses in this game I do think have some pretty cool designs, even though they're not the most memorable ever, but they look pretty cool for this style of game. So overall, the graphics are decent. I mean, like I said, it's decent as what you can get for a Game Boy game. And as for the game's music, the music in this one I think is also decent. I mean, it's nothing super fantastic and amazing, but I think it's pretty good for what it is. None of it was awful. So the music in the game is pretty upbeat for the most part, which I think is good and does fit the game. but the songs themselves are pretty short and do loop quickly, which is pretty common for Game Boy games, so yeah, not much else I can say, but it's alright. So now, if you want to go out and buy this game, I only seen 3 copies, and only one of them was an official one, and that official one happened to go for $135. Well, shit, I guess I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but the 2 other ones are reproductions, and they're going for $10 to $20, although I'm sure you can find them cheaper than that. Alrighty, so now, as for my overall thoughts on Penta Dragon on the Game Boy, is that I found this game was pretty enjoyable. So not only does the game feel pretty good, and I do think it does have some unique ideas for that it mixes shoot 'em up elements, but also has like an inventory system with it as well. And there is a fair amount of levels for a game like this too, so I do appreciate that as well. But my only complaint about some of the levels in this game is that sometimes it can feel a little bit on the long side, and that's mainly because some of the mazes in this game can be like a little confusing on where you're supposed to go because there's so much of it that does look the same. That's really my only main complaint with the game. Also, the shoot 'em up parts with the spaceship are not really my most favorite thing ever. I mean, they're alright, but I feel like they're just not as fun as like the main stages though, mainly because in the ship stages, you're always scrolling forward, and the way how the shooting works is still like how you walk around on foot, so trying to take out some of these bosses at these sections are kind of a pain in the ass, and it feels like it takes longer than it should. But thankfully, you don't have to do these bonus stages, so it's always optional. But yeah, aside from these 2 things though, I do think this is a pretty solid game that is quite enjoyable. Hell, in fact, I found it to be a little addicting. And I have a feeling if I would have played a game like this when I was younger on the Game Boy, if it, came out over here back then, I probably would have loved it. It definitely would have kept me occupied for quite a while. But ultimately, I do like the game. I think it's actually rather fun. So if you like top-down shooters where you get to freely walk around as you go through giant mazes, I would recommend it. I actually think it's really fun. Alrighty, so now I'm going to be taking a look at the sequel. Yes, this game actually got a sequel on the Super Nintendo. And it is called Trinea Penta Dragon 2, so it actually has a different name this time. And it has the same developer and publisher, and it came out in the year 1993. And I have to say, this sequel really did change things up quite a lot, but before I get into that, I will have to say right now that there is actually a more focus on a story within this one because there's actually a lot more dialogue in the gameplay, but unfortunately I won't be able to talk about it here because not only is this game like only released in Japan with no fan translation as I'm recording this, but also I couldn't find a simple summary of what the game is about online, so yeah, your guess is as good as mine, but I'm pretty sure it's probably the most simplest of stories ever, bunch of good guys have to join forces to kill a bad guy, whoop-de-doo. So anyways, in this game you can actually select 3 characters, so you got the first character from the first game being the Dragon Girl, then there's a giant knight dude, and then there's a red ninja guy. So yeah, you got Dragon Girl, Knight, and Ninja. Pretty badass cast if I say so myself. And as you would expect, they all have different playstyles. So the Knight is melee focused, but he's very slow. And the Dragon Girl has all ranged attacks of different patterns, but she has very low health. And then the ninja has to be the fastest one and has the most variety of attacks, where he has both range and melee, but unfortunately he also has very weak attacks though, like it takes more hits to kill enemies. And one thing I found surprising was that no matter which character you pick, all the stages for that character are going to be different from one another. So the first thing you do after you get past the dialogue is that you get to upgrade your character with the starting funds that you have, so you get to select either extra health, more attack power, or more special attack. So the way it works really reminds me of the game Lords of Thunder, and also just like that game, whatever money you do collect during that stage after you die, then you can actually upgrade the character further, so therefore making your second time doing the stage easier. So once the game finally begins, you realize that, yeah, it's basically just like the Game Boy game, but unfortunately there's no inventory system within this game, but you actually do get more different attacks in the game. So you have 3 basic attacks with each character, and you also get 1 special attack which takes up magic. And the main objective is the same, although the levels in this one don't seem to be nearly as long as the first game. But one thing that is unfortunate though is that whenever you do die, there is no checkpoint system, so whenever you die you have to start all the way back at the very beginning of that level. But the one positive thing I can say is that at least whenever you beat a mini-boss and then you die, then you don't have to fight the mini-boss again. So at least they were pretty fair with that one. So now let's get talking about the game's controls, and unfortunately, the controls in this one are just not nearly as good as the Game Boy game, which is kinda depressing. So the walking speed of this game feels a lot slower compared to the Game Boy game. Even when you're using the ninja, it still feels pretty slow for this style of game. Now, it's not painfully slow, it's playable, but it just makes me wonder, like, how could it have went like this? Even shooting the projectiles even feels pretty slow too. And what makes it worse is that you can only shoot one projectile at a time, so yeah, that's kind of annoying. But probably the two biggest complaints I do have is that not only is there a lot of slowdown within this game whenever there's like so many enemies on the field with the slow moving speed of the game, but also the hit detection of this game is just really aggravating. Especially whenever you use any of the melee attacks. For the range stuff, it's not too bad, but for the melee attacks though, it's really rough. Especially when you're using the knight character who only uses like melee attacks, so just using him is just super frustrating. But as bad as the hit detection sounds of this game, to put it in perspective, I don't think it's as bad as the one that was in the game Takeda Shingen that I reviewed recently. But it's still not what I would prefer to have in a game like this, and especially for a sequel too. So now, let's get moving on and start talking about the game's graphics, and graphically, I do think this game looks pretty good. But I would have to say, the best part about the graphics in my opinion would have to be the character designs and the sprite work. So I like the way how the three main characters look, I think they look really good in this game, and I also do like some of the enemy designs too, there are some pretty cool ones. And the set pieces are pretty awesome as well, which I really do like, although some backgrounds may not have the most detail ever though, but I do like the setting of them though. So I do think that the game overall does look pretty good, though of course it looks way better than the Game Boy game and it does have a more cooler art style to it, but that's to be expected though. Oh, but before I forget, one thing I should mention about the art style was that for the game's box art, the game's art was actually done by the same person who did the art for Ghost in the Shell, and that right there is pretty sweet. So now, as for the game's music, the music in this game I do think is pretty solid, though of course it's not the most memorable music ever, but I do think it does sound pretty good. I do think it is better than the Game Boy game overall. For that, there is a couple more songs in here that I actually do like, and I do think are a little bit more memorable. Like I said, not the most memorable, but more memorable enough that I can say like, oh yeah, I remember liking that one. And I probably would say that my favorite song would have to be like the medieval stage music and also the one for the cyberpunk stage. So yeah, I would say that the music in this game is kinda underrated to some degree. Like I said, not amazing, but pretty good. So now, if you want to go out and buy this game, now I've been seeing a couple different prices on here, so I've been seeing two loose copies, one going for $13 and the other one going for $44. Wow, what a big jump. And then the three complete in box copies that I see are going for like 60 to 80, so yeah, it's not stupidly expensive, but kinda strange how sporadic it is, and also there's really not that many copies on there right now, at least as I'm viewing this, so yeah, I don't know, it probably is going to be a hard game to find, even if you go to Japan itself and look around the different game stores. So now, as my overall thoughts on the sequel of Penta Dragon is that this is a game that had the potential and everything was there for making a great game and a great sequel, but unfortunately, it just was not the case here. For, like I said, the controls in this game just has a lot of issues for this type of game. It's mostly the slowdowns that really get in the way a lot, and also the hit detection with the melee attacks is just no good. Now, even though the game has a pretty slow walking speed than I would have liked, I could tolerate it if the other two things were like top notch. And it's really sad that this game's controls are like not nearly as good as a freaking Game Boy game. I guess they're too busy adding in the cool other features that they improved upon with the Game Boy game, but not enough on, you know, what actually makes the game fun. Because I don't know about you, but having good controls in a game like this is kind of a necessity. And like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but at least good enough. And you want to know what's another thing that's also a little disappointing about this game is that the game doesn't even have co-op. Now I get with the whole like slowdowns that happen with too many enemies on screen, if they did co-op mode it probably would have slowed it down like a shit ton even more, which would have been like unplayable. But if that shit was fixed, then well, it probably would have made this game a lot more fun. It may not have been a Pocky and Rocky, but at least could have been something. So yeah, it's really disappointing that this game is just not as good as what it should have been. And as for recommendations, well, yeah, like I said, it's a little tough to recommend with all those issues that I mentioned, but even with those issues though, the game isn't unplayable, it's not complete garbage or anything. It just frustrates me knowing that this is a game that could have been really good and fun. So there you have it, that's 2 of the Penta Dragon games. A random ass Game Boy game ended up getting a sequel, and yes, out of the 2 games, I like the Game Boy game a lot better. As strange as it sounds, it's actually not the first time where I end up liking a Game Boy entry more than entries on an SNES. For example, being Super Mario Land and the 6 Golden Coins, I actually like better than Super Mario World and Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, though both games are still really good, of course. But I just wanted to say that, there are times where a game will come out on a system that has a lot more limitations that also came out around the same time as another system that is much more superior, and yet the one on the more limited system can sometimes be just as good, if not even better. So with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.